Okay, well, if I start by asking the panel to consider, in the light of Candy's talk, how the findings of the Wellcome Trust consultation into research align with the emerging vision for York and your own portfolios. Perhaps, Matthias, if you wouldn't mind, can we start with you?
I just want to ask the question, why are we going to a university, right? What makes me personally want to be on campus and work with my colleagues to do research and to teach students and to engage with outside partners? And I always keep coming back to the fact that we are really in the people business. We thrive on the creative energies of the people around us. And we want to harness that. And if we value that, then we also need to be able to create an environment for others to enjoy exactly those kinds of things themselves as well. And so coming back to your question about the university strategy, I think it's really centered on some of these elements, how our own personal and professional ambitions can be realized within the structures and sort of the day-to-day operations that we have in place. And what we want to make sure is through the strategic development for the next few years or decade of the university, that we create that environment of the fertile exchange of ideas, partnerships and collaborations across disciplines, collaborations across the different career stages, collaborations with people outside the university, that we really create an enriching environment to which we contribute and from which we will benefit. And that's really what this is about. And then excellence, however you want to manage and measure it, will actually come from all of that. And if you don't have some of this, you will fall short of the full potential that people can bring to the operation.
Great, thank you. Who would like to pick that up? Because Matthias has made some great points about the collaboration. So Kieran, do you want to pick it up from that perspective?
Yeah, great, thank you. I absolutely concur with, sort of Matthias, that our starting position also has to be about who we are, and our values and how those values align, with the university values. And I want to take a slightly different stance, before I sort of say something about, how it fits the strategic vision in our portfolios, because in some ways that feels a little bit secondary for me at the moment. I was really struck by the Wellcome Trust report for three reasons, because it touched me, it touched me at an emotional level, and it made me curious and also a little bit saddened by some of the, the findings. And maybe that's something about, the kind of state of play that we are in relation to COVID-19. It's 2020, and the findings still show about some of the challenges, in relation to diversity, and female academics still, sort of, on the edges and on the margins, which you wouldn't expect, would you, in the context of universities where places, around the levelling up agenda, education for all. And so I was really pleased, with the report, in the sense that it helps us think about, the challenges ahead of us, just like a new strategy, for us as a university and our portfolios. And so the things that resonate with me, which I think are really positive and give us an opportunity to collectively be involved in a change process, and for each of us to take some responsibility on that. And I want to pick on three of the findings from that, which I think align really closely, not just to the strategic vision, but our portfolios. And by our portfolios, I mean our integrated portfolios. And that's one of the really special things about the new strategy for me. It isn't my portfolio, Karen's portfolio, Mattis's portfolio. It's our collective portfolio. So in terms of the Wellcome Trust, there is something about the future being about collaboration. Well, that's in our strategy, really clearly, really loudly. There's something about creativity and innovation, because that's what allows us to think more creatively about the kind of change that we want to implement. There's a huge amount around support and diversity, and support for change and diversity has to be about engaging for change, learning to transform, forming partnerships and making connections in order to bring about, the pursuits of progressive research that's not, you know, that's able to ask the really difficult questions. And I think that's why, you know, Candy, I was really struck by, you know, both the contents of it, and to use a phrase, it's not what you do, it's the way that you do it, you know, that's going to be really important for us.
Thank you. That idea of, you know, it's really important how we do things and the way that we address them as a collective enterprise, not just, you know, the actions and the objectives that we might put down. There's two questions that I'd really like to pick up here. So I'm going to move to Susan first, but Kate, can I just plant with you the point that Matthias made there about career stages, and ask you to think from your perspective of Dean of the Graduate School, how the idea of a collaborative culture really translates to the PGR students. But if I can leave that with you, and Susan, if I can turn to you from the perspective of HR, what do those findings mean for you, for the university, and how we take that forward?
So before I do that, Karen, I want to pick up on a couple of bits that both Matthias and Kieran have said. I think first and foremost, Matthias's point about we're a people business. I think definitely since Charlie's arrived, the consultation and the investment in hearing everybody's voice in the institution, in co-creating our draft strategy, really signals a different type of culture here at York, where we are going out and really listening to all staff groups and student groups and alumni and businesses to really find out what a university for the public good looks like. And naturally with that, that's indicated a culture shift for us as an institution, where we can build on our firm foundations of leadership, but to really enable us to empower and trust all of the staff groups. That does mean we need to be investing in further development of capability and confidence of those individuals in leadership roles, and certainly having a look at the Wellcome Trust research. You know, it's really sad to see that 25 to 35% of researchers are reporting being bullied in the workplace, and you know, from our statistics here at York, we're certainly not at that level of reporting, but that doesn't mean that we need to be complacent. We really need to be working collectively around a shared purpose, and making sure that we're giving everybody the opportunity to have their diverse thought, to bring their ideas to the table, to work things through. And that is going to be a challenge for us in some areas, as we've talked about with the Concordat, around giving 10 days of protected time to individuals to develop their capability and confidence and skills. That's going to be quite a shift, because there has been a natural hesitation from some of the research community that has said those 10 days are not built into the contracts, and previously they haven't been. So the mindset and the rhythm and the way people have worked has been one of not naturally enabling that to happen, but almost putting barriers in the place and creating a culture in some cases where individuals feel they don't feel able to engage in that learning and development. And that's a collective responsibility we all have.
It's so clear that you as colleagues in York are taking this seriously, as we all are, and thinking creatively about where you are now and where you want to be. And I think just to highlight a couple of things that I've been scribbling down in listening to you is that Wellcome and the other funders, I'm sure, we're really looking to build stronger and trusting relationships with institutions in particular, but you know, all parts of the research sector. These trusting relationships need to be built on openness and honesty. And I think in the area of bullying and harassment, I think Kieran highlighted, I mean, an institution that doesn't have any reports of bullying and harassment is not the same as an institute that doesn't have any bullying and harassment. And so, you know, we really have to, as a community, be open, be honest, you know, point out where things may be not where we want them to be, and set out how we're going to address them. And I think that's a real way to move forwards. And in building these relationships, it's another type of collaboration. the situation now is not the fault of any one part of the research community, but we do need to work as a team to address these issues. And together we can, you know, change the balance, change the drivers, and influence people. So, for example, we've just heard that perhaps the idea of 10 days for personal development a year seems an awful lot out of a research contract. But if the employers, if the universities want to provide that for their staff, and funders like Wellcome saying, and furthermore, we're funding it or we're expecting it to happen, then the PI in the middle who thinks it's a waste of time, or even the researcher in the middle who thinks it's a waste of time, is going to have to engage, and lo and behold, it'll have a positive impact, whatever career they move on to next. So I think between us, we can work as a team to make things better in research culture, and I think it's needed, but I think we can do it as well.
If I may, I turn to Kate for your thoughts, Kate, about how this pans out for the PGR community at York.
Thank you. Yes. So in terms of the PhDs, there was a few themes that came out. So some of the metrics, but I do like my colleagues want to also focus on some of the positives that emerge from the consultation, because I think this really speaks to the motivation of why people choose to do a PhD. You know, and it was very clear from the report that researchers are passionate about their work, they're proud to be part of the research community, and they don't just see it as a job, you know, it's a definite vocation, and all of us, I think, that have stayed within research feel that. And I think it's important to make sure we remember the joy and the freedom that's associated with being a researcher, and that's definitely what I want our research students to be experiencing, to know what it is to get excited about research. And I think so those positives are really important. So I don't want to just focus on some of the negatives. And I again, in this theme of collaboration, I think it also it is important, and we also need to think about how we structure PhDs, how we train PhD students in terms of collaboration, because for some people it isn't natural, and also the models that we have of PhD, you know, this in some disciplines in particular, the lone scholar working in isolation. We're not encouraging people to collaborate and co-create outputs in a way that would benefit them, not only if they want to stay as researchers, but particularly if they want to go to careers in other sectors. And you know, we have to be realistic that we're not just training people to be researchers. That most of our PhD students are going to be creative and curious and collaborative and have impact outside the university, and we need to think more broadly about what we're preparing them for. So yeah, I think the other thing that I picked up from the report, particularly on some of the attitudes, it was interesting that PhD students seem to be more positive about many of in terms of their attitudes, and that was what was clear from some of the graphs that I was looking at. And I'd like to think that isn't just naivety. I think it is. I would like to think that it is because the culture is changing, and that postgraduates are feeling more supported and much more positive than perhaps people that have had a series of maybe more challenging experiences.
Susan talked about sort of the institutional commitment, sort of the people that we have in leadership positions. But if a researcher would come to me and say, well, you know, my grant hasn't budgeted for those 10 days to have my postdoc take the following, you know, extra opportunities to round out their personal and professional growth opportunities, I would look that person in the face and would say, hey, isn't it in your interest that you have at the end of a project created or helped create a kind of researchers who sets themselves apart, who is successful throughout their entire career, who brings these skills and the mindset to the workplace wherever they are, that sets them up for success. So it should be in your own interest, whether you budgeted for this or not, right? And that mindset, that's something that we need to change. It's in everyone's interest, not just the one lonely postdoc there who gets another training opportunity. It's really for the institution and for research in general, for science, creativity, innovation. It's for everything. It's really going to be key.
I want to build on that because we've been collectively talking about, issues of trust, and we've been talking about optimism and hope, and we've been talking about culture. Then I think if we took a step back and we ask whose responsibility is it, I wouldn't want us to fall into the trap that, leadership simply resides with people that have, the titles, or the status. Surely this is about leaders of the future, and that's why, Candy, I had a real optimism, from the report. So this isn't about culture and leaders of today. This is about culture change and leaders of tomorrow. And actually, culture isn't, for me, about just simply systems and processes. You can have the best systems and processes in the world, and we've shown that. Across institutions, there are great systems and processes around equality, diversity and inclusivity, but we still have these gaps. So I really like the notion of where we started from, a people culture, developed with people, for people and by people. And I think if we thought about research in that way, and we thought about leadership and reimagining research leadership, then that would help us think about the kind of skills that we are developing, for the future, because we are doing that collectively together. So new times require new ways of working, and that requires, new thinking and new imagination, in some ways. So it's lovely having a clean sheet of paper, but you never really have a clean sheet of paper. You have history, you have heritage, and you have to work with that. And the other point I want to make is, I really like, when the world of optimism collides with the world of, challenge and, and conflict, because it's in those moments of crisis and conflict that actually some of the really great new ways of thinking happen. So I hope that we continue to develop a culture that is transparent and open, as the report suggests, but one that allows us to have some of those complex challenges, because during those periods, and we've shown that, we've shown that through COVID-19, about what can happen when we reimagine, and we don't shy away from some of those more, complex. So let's work with the difficulty as well as the optimism.
Thanks, everyone. That's really robust, and I'm picking up all sorts of ideas and a sense of a real culture shift here, and that's not going to happen overnight. But collectively, in the way that you've described, I can see that might be something that we put out to our research community to engage with, to think about how they can work cross-discipline, cross-culture, cross-border, etc., in order to make those changes.
I think the fact that we're one of the first institutions that have said from October the 20th, when an employer's fixed term contract is due to expire, and they've worked with us for 2 years consecutive service, we will move them to an open contract if they've got some more work to go to. And that's a phenomenal shift for us here at York, that we're not just bouncing researchers from one fixed term contract to another fixed term contract. The whole piece around what's come out of the Wellcome Trust around that security and support, that's a real visible practical commitment that we've made at an institutional level. I think if we move on to other shifts that we're making, if we're looking at traditionally the leadership provision that you and I have facilitated here at York for the research community, we've very much focused on individual leadership development. And certainly following and aligning the current work that we're doing with the University Executive Board around developing confidence and capability of that collective leadership capability. All of our leadership programs now are being aligned to focusing on creating and defining a shared purpose, looking at collaboration across boundaries, interdisciplinary, making sure that we have that diversity of thought in the room, looking at how we build trust and interdependency across groups and in collective groups, and also looking at how we build on trust, empowerment, ownership, and going back to what Kieran said, not about leadership being a formal role, but actually saying each and every one of us have our own values and our own opportunity to take that self-leadership and to influence and to contribute to the agenda around us. So that switch at an institutional level away from individual leadership development more to a collective shared purpose of us as leaders, and not just in the formal capacity of a leader, but as an individual rallying around a common good. I think that's a big shift for us.
That's really helpful, thank you. Anyone else want to come in on that? So the kind of practical commitments that we might be able to make.
Yeah, I want to just say, I mean, it starts to some extent with some of the very basics. I mean, there needs to be a zero tolerance on bullying in the workplace, and we need to have available to those who feel that they are in an adversarial environment, the reporting mechanisms and all the protections to assure that the university follows up on this and does right by them. And that whatever creates that environment, that there is a mechanism to rectify that. So that's sort of the very basic. But at the other end of the spectrum, the much more aspirational pieces, I think, will also come along with developing partnerships with people and teams, not just across the university, but with other universities, with different parts of society outside the academic world, who all will look at us, and we will need to be able to look at them and say, hey, here are the standards, are the highest standards, not just on the academic work that we deliver, but there are the highest standards of personal and professional conduct. It's without those, the partnerships will not live, and vice versa. If the partnerships are really important, they will drive even the skeptics to begin to adjust to those constraints. So I'm quite hopeful. And while I said, at the beginning, one of those is very practical and immediate and sort of nuts and bolts. The other one is aspirational, but I have no doubt we'll get there.
And then at a very practical level, I think, what we could do. So if we're serious about, developing research leaders' capability, then we could think about sort of ensuring that they are partners in a decision-making process, not representatives in the decision-making process. So often on our committees, we have their voice, which is really important, but they're not equal partners. So one way that we could do that is, provide opportunities for them that we're not doing to them, but we're working with them. And I think the other way that we could begin to explore is to design more thoughtful and engaged, sort of leadership training for them. And by leadership training, I don't mean, to be, simply a research leader, to be a research leader that's engaged and connected and understands the role of, public engagement and cultural engagement, even if that's not necessarily part of their remit now. And what about the whole area of kind of entrepreneurialism and being entrepreneurial? Because often as researchers, we are having to learn the ropes as we go along. We're having to learn to be resilient, to pick up different challenges. So I think we've got a really unique opportunity to build on the great work that Susan and Mattis has just been talking about. And I wondered, what a co-designed and experiential research leaders programme, would look like, where they're working on real life issues that the university is facing and they're facing, and then they present, their findings and their solutions to the senior leadership team, because that gives them visibility and exposure. They're learning new research skills as part of that process. And so we're not putting them in what I call this sort of, traditional senses of training. Let me teach you about confidence. Let me give you, and I'm not knocking that. All of that has a place, but we keep talking about new times. So let's think about new times and new actions. Let's give them, both exposure and the skill set to take some of those informed risks. But then with informed risks comes responsibility, and so I think that way we're creating, the lived experience of researchers, we're not just capturing good stories of what works and what doesn't work, what they might want and what they might not want. They're co-designers, you know, and helping shape, you know, shape and transform, you know, policy and practice, you know, with us and for themselves.
I was just observing that the idea of the lived experience is an expression that you know, many of us are beginning to use in the context of the Concordat and what that means for York. And you know, we're doing our utmost through the consultation to try and engage with researchers at all levels. So starting with PGRs and our postdocs and our research fellows and our principal investigators to try and understand better that lived experience and to reflect that in our ambitions. I wonder if I might invite each of you to think about what in a few years' time what would be the hallmark? What would be the lived experience of our researchers? What would you want to go out and say, you know, to the world? This is the experience of our researchers. Perhaps that's something that you can articulate.
It's interesting, Matthias, because when I heard Karen, I thought of the story that we had around when we were thinking about the strategy and the fact it was really hard to put in a narrative, but wouldn't it be great if it didn't matter whether you were an employer or an individual in a community or another institution, but just in that engagement with that individual, you were able to articulate, you must be from York. And whether that's as a graduate, whether that's as a researcher, whether that's as a member of staff that's moved around, that there's something in the cultural DNA of our mindset and our openness and our commitment to the public good and the shared purpose that it's maybe hard to articulate, but you know when it's touched you.
That's it exactly, Susan. It's that DNA. If one of our researchers applied to any of the research councils, any of the funders, there would be a differentiation, a positive differentiation between one of our researchers and someone from somewhere else who might have an impeccable publication list and you know, research profile, but which the experience of being a researcher at York somehow differentiated them. And I guess I'm trying to wonder, you know, what might that look like? What's the hallmark of a York researcher compared with a Imperial or Cambridge or Berkeley?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to single out any of the others, but I would want to think of us as the environment that encourages an open self-awareness. You know, it's all this change really starts with the individuals. And it doesn't happen if you're not aware, and you can't change then the institution if you aren't open about the awareness that was created for you. And that requires an environment within which people can feel comfortable sharing their feelings and experiences. And then once you have that foundation laid, then on top of that, you can then begin to build the skill sets that are required to execute on that. And collaborate with people in different ways, embrace the differences that they bring to the teams or to the ideas in new ways, find new research questions, find new applications, and really from there build out to a different research agenda and a different way of having impact, not just on the lives of the people around you then, but then more broadly across society. That's, I know, a tall order, but that's the kind of institution I'd love to be part of and love to help create.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that. And I want to take a particular line out of the strategy that, you know, Matthias and colleagues have worked so hard to develop, which I think, you know, for me captures the heart and essence of the kind of things that we've been talking about. And so, you know, I'd like to see our researchers, you know, building from what we've put in, which is about, you know, curiosity, creativity, innovation, but these are guided by the principles of integrity, justice, you know, diversity and rigor. And thinking about that both their skills and their knowledge and their experience is driven by what I call critical by design, and it's what Charlie calls, you know, what's it all for? So the way that our researchers, you know, develop in the future is at the heart some of those values that are part of the report that Candy's, you know, been highlighting and talking about, and the way that we've been talking about our culture, our values, that those things then, you know, become aligned, because then they become part of our DNA, and it's a DNA that inspires, you know, others to want to be part of it.
Candy, is there anything you want to respond in the meantime?
Yeah, again, thank you, Karen. I'm not sure where this goes, but really, I think one of the takeaways from me, and perhaps it can follow what Kate might have to say, and it's not to undermine what you've been talking about, but actually to complement it. So that I think I'd urge individual researchers, so not to wait for the processes and the schemes and the funding to be in place institution-wide before they try and improve research culture. Individuals can do it today. They can go back to where they work and they can think about how they're acting and behaving and responding and working. And they can start to take those steps to make things better for them and for the people around them. And so I think, again, it's the complementarity between what's happening in the institution, but what individual York researchers can also do. Not to wait for someone to come with a magic wand, but to actually make it happen themselves.
Thank you. That's really helpful, and it puts a responsibility that the Concordat invites towards individual researchers as well. You know, there's an expectation around the funders, around institutions, around managers of research, but also, as you say, about those individual researchers and what their responsibilities are as a part of a collective.
Yes.
Kate, do you want to add something to that from your perspective?
Yes, and I think coming at this from the perspective of PhD students, again, it's thinking about what are we training them for? What, you know, why are they here doing a PhD? And again, it's preparing them for people for many different careers, because most people starting their working lives today will change careers multiple times, and that may include research and it may not. And so that we have to think about what the broader picture in terms of the supervision and the training provision that we're providing, and to make sure that we're really preparing them for what lies ahead. With a caveat in that the world, of course, is changing so fast, and I think really that we need to future-proof the careers of today's postgrad. So I think for me, it's really important to make sure that postgraduate researchers have opportunities, and this really picks up on many of the themes that we've discussed also already, is that it's not just the intellectual skills or the technical abilities that we need to develop, but it's also the emotional skills and the behaviours to address you know, the next big challenges, and to move into jobs, into research projects, into sectors that we probably can't even imagine right now. So that means that a lot of the sort of technical skills that many people put so much value on, they might be out of date very quickly in a lot of the projects. So really what I would want is that the legacy of York Graduate Research School and more broadly the university is that, you know, we're sending out this generation of researchers to go forth, and these people have a flexible mindset, and they are resilient, and they're able to take on, and they're positive, and they feel empowered to make change, that they have that personal power, but also feel that responsibility for society, the local society that they're living in, and the community they're living in, and the society more generally, to go forth, you know, and use what, you know, the amazing talents and creativity and the skills that they have to foster positive impact on the world.
Thank you. That's really great. In which case, does anybody feel there's anything uncovered? Because I think you've covered a huge amount of ground.
I mean, I don't know whether we want to touch on this, on any of the other external drivers of change. You know, the government's roadmap for R&D, you know, and this sense that the government, so BEIS, have put out this paper, and that they're really interested in looking to increase the attractiveness and sustainability of careers throughout the R&D workforce. And of course, they're looking at this R&D much more broadly, so it's not just researchers, but it's also technicians, innovators, entrepreneurs and practitioners. And so we should be thinking also a bit perhaps more broadly beyond. I know the subject of this conference is researcher, but those researchers themselves will potentially come from different backgrounds and go out and become, you know, the future entrepreneurs or research technicians. So again, it's making sure that we value we value all parts of that R&D spectrum, and not just quite a narrow definition of what research is, I think. So that would only be the only thing I'd like to add, I think.
I was going to say, just adding to that, Kate, I mean, one of the things we've talked about with the future of work and the need to be far more flexible in your skills and your abilities, one of the bits of work that we're looking at the moment more broadly across the whole of the workforce is how do we build in various different support mechanisms that allow people to be curious, to try out new things in a safe environment, to think more laterally rather than necessarily in a hierarchical way, to manage their career path so they can move diagonally, sideways, switch and try different things, and building up case studies and banks of experience and TED style talks of people that have gone through different routes to show that there is a non-traditional way. And going back to what Candy said about individuals taking ownership right now and from today being able to make different choices, but us maybe helping them shine a light on what those different route maps are, because for some people that can be quite daunting if they've had their mindset of I'm taking a traditional route, and to diversify that and to be comfortable with thinking more broadly, for some will be easy and for others will be a little bit more difficult, I think.
I think this is going to be a real thing that I think there's so much focus on it, as you say, Kate. There's the roadmap, there's the UKRI action plan, which is very explicit about valuing different sorts of career paths and different types of research equally. And I think we're going to see that through lots of different activities and actions through funders, employers, where individuals will, you know, so for example, the traditional, you know, thing that's said by PIs is that I can't advise my postdocs or my PhD students about research in industry because I've got no experience of it. But which may be true, but and so when they come to Wellcome with their list of the people they've trained, they only mention the postdocs or the people who've gone on to be professors. Or whereas, you know, Wellcome, for example, we're really going to push the fact that we value, and in fact, you know, individuals need to recognise that they can have a successful career without converting into the professor that trained them 25, 30 years ago. So, you know, this diversity of options, this, Kieran said optimism. I think we're really at a point now where there is so much momentum that surely we're reaching a tipping point and things will get better.
And I just want to build on that, because I think those points are really important. It's not about adding, you know, more and more layers and expecting, you know, our early career researchers, our postgraduate students, you know, to be doing more and more and more. And I thought there was a lovely piece in your report around, you know, if we're going to bring about some of these changes, if we're going to take this moment in time opportunity, then, you know, we also have to think about what we value and what we reward, not in instrumental ways. So, you know, this whole area of, you know, industry awards and business engagement, you know, are going to be really critical and fundamental, you know, to the skills that we develop of the future. And, you know, and the impact case studies are a real good exemplar. So rather than them just being, you know, ref driven, we could think more creatively about our systems and our processes. Now, you may not want to include this little, you know, this piece, but I really do think it's important that, you know, when we talk about culture change, we learn to let go of things, but we also make sure that our systems and our structures and our processes and our panels that look at these things are also part of, you know, the training and the development. So that, you know, when we have promotions committee, it's a bit like when I'm asked to supervise as an external a PhD and then a DBA. You know, I can't help but challenge my colleagues when they look at a DBA, but they look at it in the same lens as they're looking at as a PhD. Those two criteria are very different. You know, or when we're assessing, you know, careers and research careers through different lens. You know, professor is one route, but, you know, a teaching focus, you know, sort of career, you know, is another. That doesn't mean it's devoid of research. It's research that's based on teaching and learning. So I think we have, you know, an opportunity to make sure that our systems and our processes are aligned, you know, with our aspirations. And we also learn to think about what are we going to let go of, you know, in the new normal, as opposed to saying, what are we going to hoard, and then what are we going to add more layers onto?
Thank you, everybody. Unless there are any parting gestures, then I'll try and summarize, and I've been scribbling furiously, but what I've heard across the piece is our collective responsibility and our collaborations that we build and partnerships with other institutions, and the way that we can capitalize on those, both to develop our curiosity and our self-awareness as researchers about the impact that we're having, both at societal level and also at individual level. And I'm taken and inspired by Kieran's invitation to everybody there, just to think about what behaviours can we let go of that perhaps don't best serve us, and what new behaviours and new attitudes and ways of working might we move towards, which gives us a really great focus for the rest of the conference in terms of thinking about how we might respond to the Concordat and how indeed we might carve out our own research identity and what that means for us. So a huge thank you to everyone on the panel, to Candy, to Kieran, to Matthias, to Kate, and to Susan for giving up their time to cogitate and reflect on these ideas, and to kick the conference off to a really great start. Thank you, everybody.